"Honey, can we buy this pot?" The woman smiled and pointed to the bright pink utensil. "I hope you're kidding now." Her spouse looked at her carefully. "No, why should I? I just love to update the dishes." "Then use your own money to upgrade." "I don't have any money." "James, well, why do we always fight at the store? We're a family, we have to make concessions to each other." "Well, that's the way it seems to me. Let's go home. How long can you stare at this nonsense?" Frances lowered her eyes and slowly followed her husband. If it were up to her, she would have bought everything from the store, but she had almost no money of her own. The couple got into the car and drove slowly toward home. Frances kept looking out the window. She thought about the children growing up again, and how to approach her husband with this question. After all, they needed to buy new clothes. James looked straight ahead. He was immersed in his own thoughts. "Look, why don't we stop at the store and get some meat?" "James, I hardly have any money." "I see. Then let's go home." Frances was very surprised that he didn't even try to offer his money. By the way, he clearly had it. He was always saving it for something. Sometimes it seemed to Frances that they were nothing to each other, even though they lived together. If James could live and eat separately, he would be glad. The woman's phone rang, and she immediately pulled it out of her bag. "Oh, it's my son calling," she commented. "Hello, hi. Mom, are you coming home soon?" "Yes, we're on our way." "What's wrong?" "Well, I just wanted to do my homework with Betty." "Well, since you're going, I guess I'll be going home." "Come on, if you have to go, go." "Thanks, Mom. I'll be on time." "Where's your brother?" asked Frances. "Oh, he's probably home by now." "Okay, son, let's talk at home." She put the phone down and stared at her husband. "You're not going to believe this," she began from afar. "What happened?" James made big eyes. "Our Michael got a girl. He's going to do her homework today." "That's nice. Otherwise, he's always alone. As long as they don't have a baby, and the rest is okay." James laughed. Of course, such a joke did not please Frances. She restrained herself and said nothing. Frances constantly let what her husband said pass her by. If she listened to what he said forever, she would be permanently offended. They hardly spoke at all, and just stayed quiet all the way. It was a long drive, and the woman decided to lighten the mood a little. "James, why don't we go to your parents' house this weekend?" "No, it's too far away. It would only waste money. We could just call my parents." "James, but it was your mom's birthday last week." "Did you congratulate her?" my spouse asked. "Well, I kind of called her. What else does she need?" The man wondered. "She's your mother. She'd obviously be happy if you came. Don't you know old people? They're like little children, very fond of attention." "Frances, there's no time at all right now. Let her wait for now. When we have time, we'll definitely go, but definitely not now." All the rest of the way Frances just stared out the window. Sometimes it was worth keeping silent to avoid angering her husband. That's how they lived. Already at home, Frances was looking intently at her husband, who had just eaten and had not even cleaned his plate. He was watching TV and didn't seem to notice anything that was going on around him. Frances was instantly annoyed by this, but clenching her teeth, she asked, "James, why didn't you clean up your plate after yourself?" "What do I need you for?" "I married you to cook for me, to clean up after me," the spouse said. "I thought you married me because you loved me. And it turns out you only did what was good for you, as always?" "Why are you nagging again? I'm actually watching TV." Frances got up from the table and gathered the plates and went to the sink to wash them. Sometimes she heard her husband laughing. Apparently, something interesting was on TV. That was how their evenings went. James came home from work, ate dinner, and spent the rest of the day in front of the television. Frances' day was filled with all kinds of worries. First, the couple had 2 children, 2 twins, Mark and Michael. Frances still remembered the day they were told she was pregnant with 2 children at once. It was the truest joy of all. Even her husband was thrilled. And when he found out he was going to have 2 boys, he was jumping for joy. He wasn't like that before. He had been kinder. That was a time Frances remembers often. The boys were 10 years old, but that didn't mean they had less to worry about. However, James felt that once the boys went to school, Frances had a lot of time on her hands. And now, in addition to her job, she had to handle all the family responsibilities well. James scolded Frances for not having time to do the dishes or make dinner. He didn't care at all that Frances was tired at her job and that she could barely walk home. After washing all the dishes, the woman went to the bedroom, lay down on the bed, and applied cream to her hands. Sometimes she wanted to howl in pain. It seemed as if her husband did not understand her at all. Frances stared at the ceiling and thought about her life. She met James when they were students. At the time, he seemed like a man she would feel like she was behind a stone wall with. At the time, James was so funny that many girls wanted to start dating him, but he chose Frances. The woman distinctly remembered how they had gotten married. They had no money, and it was very difficult for them. Though when it comes to today, not much has changed. Yes, James was in an executive position, but he didn't provide much money for his family. Whenever money was mentioned in conversation, a scandal would break out. He felt that the money he gave for food and clothing was enough. All that was left to him was his money, and no one could claim it. If Frances had only known that James was really that greedy, she would have thought twice before agreeing to marry him. But in general, the woman is grateful to him because they had two wonderful boys whom she loved madly. James was not always so greedy. He used to give all the money to his wife when he was just working in the factory, and he thought his wife was better able to manage the family budget. Then something happened. Either he had heard some interesting stories or something clicked in his head, but he decided that some of the money would be enough. But that's not the most interesting part. Even though James kept the money, he never had it. Not only Frances wondered, but so did James' mother. Where did he spend it? However, it was impossible to ask him about it. The man did not buy himself anything expensive, nor did he drive a nice car or give expensive gifts. Everyone knew perfectly well that his salary was several times more than what he brought home. That James wasn't cheating, Frances was certain. He was not that kind of man. Despite his bad temper, he would not allow such betrayal. And there was a similar question about money. Would he spend money on another man's woman? The door to the bedroom opened, and Mark appeared on the doorstep. "Mom, the school told us to turn in money for New Year's Eve." "Oh yeah, I completely forgot my teacher called me." "Now, son, I'll give you everything." Frances jumped out of bed and went to her bag. She took out her purse and began counting out the amount she needed. "Mom, I don't understand why this is necessary at all. After all, we're big now and we don't believe in Santa Claus. Why do we need to give money for these sweets?" "Son, that's the way it's supposed to be. In a couple of years, no one will be giving you sweet presents." Frances smiled. Mark sighed heavily and folded the money neatly into his pencil case. "Have you done your homework yet?" "I have, and Michael is still doing." "I see. I'll come over and check your homework soon." "Okay, Mom." Frances laid down on the bed again. She allowed some more time for Michael to finish his homework so she could check everything at once. Of course, the woman, like any other mother, wanted only one thing: for her children to do well in school, and for them never to have problems with their studies. Frances wanted her sons to become military like her father. Yes, Frances' father had been a soldier. It's a shame he didn't live to see those days, but Frances always thought of him fondly. She believed that there was simply no better man. And even James, for one, had something to look up to. Again, she wondered. There was probably never a time with James that, when they went out as a family, her husband acted like a child. She couldn't remember him running around with the boys, playing anything with them. No amount of persuading the children had any effect on him. However, her father, despite his seriousness, was never averse to fooling around with his children. Soon Frances got up and headed to the children's room. Michael had finished all his homework by this time. Frances checked her math and then began to gather the boys' clothes around the room and fold them neatly. "Michael, how many times have I told you? If you took something off, Take it and hang it up neatly. Why do you always have everything scattered around? Mom, it's not mine, it's Mark's. The boy tried to justify himself. But I remember perfectly well that Mark wore blue belt pants this morning. Why are you trying to lie to me? My mother wondered. Michael lowered his eyes and he felt ashamed, not only in front of his mother, but also in front of his brother, who kept looking at him intently. Okay, brother, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Everybody go to bed. It's an early start to school tomorrow, Mom commanded. She left the room and turned out the lights. Then she went into the kitchen, took the mug and plate off the table again. Apparently, her husband was snacking on something again while they watched TV. Again, Frances put everything away and went to the bedroom. By the time she got to her bed, her husband was already asleep. Sometimes Frances wondered, what did she see in James? But despite his bad temper and trying to prove to everyone that he was independent, she still loved him. However, friends didn't understand Frances. They didn't understand what it was to love James. Even some of the men thought he was strange. Then morning came. Frances got up early to make breakfast for her sons and her beloved husband. Once everyone was sent off to work and school, Frances would start getting ready for herself. She worked at the supermarket as a cashier. Frankly, this job should have been replaced a long time ago, because they paid her very little. But thanks to the fact that she worked in that department, she could come home before her husband and cope with household chores. All in all, life was going on quietly. Today, Frances arrived at work a little early. Somehow, the twins ran off to school 10 minutes early, and her husband left for work early. Frances sat down at her cash register and looked intently at her neighbor. Hey, Laura, how are you? I'm fine. How was your weekend? What weekend? Laundry, cleaning, dinner, and it's evening. Well, that's what I'm doing. The workday usually went by very quickly. Frankly, Frances didn't even notice the time. She was so used to this job that the day flew by like the blink of an eye. All of her friends worked at this job. When she got home, the woman would immediately start cooking dinner. That's how her day went. For some reason, her husband was late at work today, and Frances even wanted to call him. However, she tried to restrain herself and did not call him. She knew that if she called her husband, she would have to hear right away that she was bothering him, that he was driving, and there was nothing to worry about. He's a grown man, and nothing could happen to him. The woman waited for her husband after all. He returned at 11 p.m. James, where have you been? I've been worried sick, she admitted immediately. What do you mean? Where have you been? I've been at work, of course, and you know that very well. You've never been late before, and now all of a sudden you're late. It's the middle of the night. Well, that means I had things to do. And anyway, pack me a bag. I'm leaving for the capital tomorrow night. To the capital? What for? Our director is going to open a branch in the capital. I'm going to get acquainted with the staff. But why do you have to do that? It was always the director himself who saw to that. He went until I was promoted, husband clarified. I see, all right, I'll pack your bags. That's good. I'm going to bed now, I'm terribly tired. Frances probably wanted to ask her husband many more things, but he was, as usual, not in the mood. The woman knew he had received his paycheck today, but he gave her nothing. Apparently, he was so tired that he just forgot about it. In the morning, when Frances went out to the kitchen, she saw money on the table and a note. The note said that her husband had left a little less money because he had taken some of it for his trip. The duffel bag was gone too, so James was leaving right from work. This made Frances a little wary because she thought her husband would at least kiss her goodbye. In fact, there had long been a coldness in their relationship. Sometimes her husband would just go to bed in the big room. It was meaningless to talk about any romance. Yet deep down inside, Frances still hoped that things could be changed. She so wanted to go back to the time when they were madly happy, when they loved each other and at least just had a heart-to-heart talk. Anyway, James left without saying goodbye. He did not call his wife until late that night, when he reached the capital. He told her that he had checked into a hotel and was going to an important meeting tomorrow, and how much time he would spend in the capital at all is unknown. I must admit that Frances was very sad and lonely. She did not know what to do on the first day. Everything seemed to be fine as it was. She could imagine her husband just watching TV in the other room. He didn't talk to her much on ordinary days either. But Frances felt lonely and didn't know who to share it with. The next day, a friend came to visit Frances. Frances decided that spending time with her friend would be good for her, and she would not have to think about nonsense. They sat in the kitchen and drank tea. The conversation was, of course, about men. "Frances, I don't understand you. You have so many opportunities. Why don't you forget about James and find yourself an interesting man?" Her friend advised her. "Well, who am I going to find myself? Think about it. Who would want me with 2 children? You're so beautiful. There will be a line of men lined up for you. I don't want anyone. I still love James. Even if he's not the same man he was when he was young, there's still love on my side." The woman looked away. "I don't understand why you love him. He's greedy, mercenary, and very nasty." Her friend wrinkled her nose. "It seems that way to you. In fact, James is very kind." "Well, that's up to you. But I could never live with a man like your James." Frances knew full well that Laura disliked James. There was nothing she could do about it. One day Laura and James had a big fight. It happened at Frances' anniversary party when Laura tried to stand up for Frances and explain to James that it was her birthday and she could absolutely rest. That day, James didn't like his wife's dress at the time. He made a whole scandal out of it. And in the end, Frances just went and changed. Yes, she was embarrassed in front of the guests. And she was embarrassed in front of herself too. But again, she wrote it all off to the fact that her husband just wanted to do what was best. She never thought about divorce. Frances thought only of James changing. But how could she believe that when James himself was fine with it? And he certainly wasn't going to change himself. The evening flew by very quickly. Toward nightfall, she left. Frances lay in her bed and began to think about her husband. He didn't call me again today, so he's busy again. James had been in the capital for a week. He was going home tonight. How Frances was looking forward to it. She made the most delicious salads, roasted meat, and made 3 kinds of appetizers. The woman truly prepared for her husband's arrival. She thought that this long separation might serve to finally get them to sit down and have a heart-to-heart talk. Or perhaps they might even bond. In the meantime, the twins were at their grandmother's house. They went there almost every weekend. To be honest, there was a lot less control over them, and they had a lot of friends in the village. In general, as soon as they had a chance to go to grandmother's place, they would go right away without a second thought. Frances was running around the house and getting ready for her husband's arrival. She put on a red dress and did a light makeup job. Yes, the woman really missed her husband. According to her calculations, he should arrive at 9 p.m. It was now 7 o'clock. Frances was putting on lipstick over and over again. She wanted to look perfect the moment James came home. The clock struck 9 and then 10 o'clock. The woman didn't understand why her spouse wasn't there yet. But again, she was afraid to call. She was afraid she would distract him from the road. When she couldn't wait any longer, she still picked up the phone and dialed the cherished number. For some reason, no one answered, and the answering machine went off. She called the number again and again, but it was still disconnected. Strange thoughts crept into her head. She had a hunch that something bad had happened. And no matter how much Frances tried to push the thoughts away, nothing worked. Frankly, Frances did not notice how she fell asleep sitting on the couch. She woke up when her phone rang and an unfamiliar number popped up on the screen. "Hello, I'm listening." "Hello, is this Frances?" Some unfamiliar voice asked. "Yes, it's me. Hello, who's bothering me?" "It's the police calling for you. We're on the highway right now. There's been an accident here, and your husband is dead." "Dead how?" she asked Frances calmly enough so far. "He drove into the oncoming lane, failed to maintain control, and was unable to evade an oncoming car." "Are you kidding now?" Frances, I understand your shock, but have the courage to come to the lineup. Then it was all a blur. Frances dropped the phone from her hands and wept bitterly. She didn't want to believe it was true until the last. And the moment she ran around the house and was about to go to the lineup, the scariest thing was going through her head. It was as if someone was saying that he was gone, and someone was claiming that it was just someone's cruel joke. She arrived at the morgue, and soon she was being led into a lineup. There was no doubt, it was James. The picture she saw made her sick. And the last thing she remembered was looking at his right arm. For some reason there was no wedding ring on it. Frances regained consciousness in the corridor. A young doctor sitting next to her. Come to your senses. I know it's a hard picture, but you have to pull yourself together. You have 2 sons. You have to hang in there. How come? Why is life so unfair? After all, I love him, cried Frances, pouring tears. Calm down. I understand you. Everything will be all right. But why is this happening to me? Why am I going through all this? Frances no longer remembered leaving the morgue and walking to the park across the street. As soon as she sat down on the bench, she wrapped her arms around her face. The woman had been crying for so long, and it was beginning to dawn outside. Then there was the funeral, to which all the relatives came. Each of them tried to support his grief-stricken wife. Only how could words help? Frances had no idea how she would live now. She was left with 2 sons for whom she was now both mother and father. Frances, hang in there. It's very hard for all of us right now, but we mustn't lose ourselves. We have Mark and Michael, said James' mother as she hugged the woman. Surely, I understand everything, but I can't help myself. He left me at a difficult time in my life. The older woman shook her head. It was hard for her too. Her last son had passed away. Shirley's life hadn't been the happiest either. She had had a daughter and a son before. Now she had no one left. Her daughter Sarah died through no fault of her own. Frances was in tears. She looked intently at her children and did not know how to help them. They too were suffering from their loss. After the funeral, everyone went to Frances' home, where a memorial table was set up. There almost until the morning people were talking about what a wonderful man James had been. That evening the alcohol did its job. And once again, when one of the neighbors was saying that James was a wonderful man, Frances loudly hit the shot glass, which shattered to pieces. Why do you lie? You all didn't like him. You all disliked him. You talked about how he was greedy and wouldn't do any good anyway. Why lie about it now? Cried Frances. Frances, I beg you, calm down. It's indecent. Shirley tried to calm her down. How can I calm down when I am alone? He was a friend or distant relative to you, but to me he was the whole world. Then she and Shirley put the dishes away and went to their rooms. It was the hardest night of all. Frances couldn't sleep for a long time. She was twisting with heartache and felt like it had been an insanely long night. And she also thought about how hard it would be for them now. She had a tiny salary, and she had 2 sons to raise alone. It had been exactly 1 month since James had been gone. This family had had to get used to strict financial discipline. They had long ago given up on expensive things and tried to save money on everything. Frances couldn't remember the last time she had a day off. She tried to take every extra shift to earn as much as she could. But no matter what the woman did, the money wasn't enough. Also, Shirley had hardly gotten out of bed lately. Frances knew that the end was near. Honestly, the woman just didn't know where to get that strength anymore. The boys were growing up and understood that it was really hard for Mom. They tried to help with everything. They often did the dishes as they came home from school, though Frances did not even ask them to do that. Mark began to do the cooking, and often when her mother came home from work, they would eat the food that Mark had prepared. All in all, Frances was really proud of her boys and knew that they would grow up to be decent and honest people. Every weekend the woman went to her husband's grave. She would spend hours there crying and talking about what was going on in their lives. Today was Sunday. It was winter outside. Frances, getting up early, began to get ready to go to the cemetery. Michael, will you come with me? Mom, I'm sorry, but we wanted to meet some friends today. And anyway, I don't think we need to go to Dad's every weekend, Mark stated. Son, but this is very important to me. Mom, I'm sorry, but we're not going. If it's important to you, then go yourself. So I will. Frances did not resent her sons. She understood perfectly well. The sons had grown up, their interests had changed, and they needed a lot of free time. In a little while they would grow up. First they would have girls and then families. When she arrived at her husband's grave, Frances carefully shoveled off the snow and sat down next to him. Hi, well, here I am. We don't have anything new. Mark said today that he wants to go to chef school. Frances smiled and ran her hand over her husband's picture. I know you would have been against Mark becoming a chef. You'd say it wasn't a man's profession and that he should go to work in a factory, not a canteen. But I think let him choose the profession he likes. And Michael, he's certainly all over you. He stated today that he wants to be a machinist, but something bothers me. I thought they would always be together, and now they're already starting to have a divergence of interests. They'll be studying in different places. Frances looked at the picture on James' grave. It seemed to her that he really understood her. Darling, I'd miss you so much. You can't even imagine it. You know, every time I turn on the bed, not finding you with my hand hurts terribly. I miss you so much. She could talk to the picture for hours. The woman hadn't felt warm or cold for a long time. She just didn't care. Her friends told her it was time to move on, that it was time to find her happiness. But Frances wouldn't listen to anyone. She loved James and had no intention of betraying him. In the evening, when Frances returned home, she sat in the kitchen and made herself a cup of strong tea. She thought about life, about how it had been a whole year, and it was probably really time to get rid of some of James' things. There really wasn't room in the closets anymore. But the thought that a part of James's soul would be gone with it was unsettling to her. Michael came into the kitchen and sat next to her and made himself some tea. Mom, how long can this go on? You promised to empty the big closet last week. Where am I going to put my jacket? Okay, son, I'll be sure to put everything away tomorrow. I'll have to give Daddy's things to the nursing home. Then give it to them. Stop taking up space in our apartment. Michael, you've become such a grown-up. I'm proud of you. Will you help me get my stuff to the car tomorrow? Sure. The next day, Frances really began going through the things in the closet. She came across one strange box that held some documents all the way to the top. These documents were very interesting. It was strange. She had never paid attention to that box before. Or was it just not there? Frances sat down on the floor and carefully went through the papers. But what a surprise it was when she found some strange notebook with rather strange entries and bank statements. These statements told her that there was money in the accounts, but the accounts were in some other names. Frances looked carefully at the notebook and didn't understand what it all meant. The notebook contained the names of her children and some women. It appeared that for many years the family had lived very poor, when their head, the breadwinner of the family, invested his money in obscure accounts. Frances had many questions. The woman understood that she could not handle it alone. She should contact the lawyer who handled the inheritance transaction. Literally 2 hours later, the lawyer was at her house. I don't understand what this all means. What are these statements? What are these exorbitant sums? What accounts are they in? And if they're James' accounts, then why didn't they go to me when we inherited them? That still needs to be checked. You see, they are made in other names. And why was all this done? The answer to that question must be found out first. Frances was burning with curiosity. She had lived quietly until this day, but now she was overwhelmed with emotion. And frankly, they were not the best. It turned out that her husband had hidden a lot from her, since they had never talked about that money. So the lawyer began to conduct a check. Soon it turned out that in addition to Frances, James had another woman, Angela. It was in her name that the account was set up, where James transferred almost half of his salary. But that's all the lawyer could find out. I'm sorry, but I can't look up anything in other people's papers without a request. I can't tell you who Angela is. But here's the paperwork that proves that's where your husband transferred the money. And how am I supposed to find all this out? Well, there is only one option here. You can only go to her yourself and find out everything. All right, that's what I'll do. I'm now very interested in how my husband lived. At that moment, it was as if Frances' eyes had been opened. She began to see things differently. All her life, she had been sure that James was a decent man, incapable of betrayal. And today she found out that he had been transferring money to some Angela for quite a long time. Who was this woman? Why was he giving her money? There was so much to find out. But Frances was eager, and there was no stopping her. Just a week later, she flew to the capital, taking her husband's notebook with her. Already in the capital, she called the number in the notebook and made an appointment, introducing herself as a notary's assistant. A woman of about 35 came to the meeting. She had never seen such a woman. "Did you call me?" "Hello, yes. And what did you want?" "I've already inherited. I tricked you. And I'm not a representative of the notary, I'm James' wife." Angela's eyes became huge. She looked around, but then sat down at the table after all. "So you found me after all. Tell me, who were you to my husband? Why was he transferring money to you? Please tell me the truth. I can't sleep without knowing what my husband was doing. Your husband and I were lovers. Is that answer enough for you?" Now it was as if the world had collapsed under Frances' feet. Frances looked intently at the woman and just didn't know what to answer. "I'll tell you more. Your husband and I have a daughter." "But how? I always thought James was faithful to me, after all." It was hard to find the words. It was a long time ago. He once went on a business trip for 2 months, you may remember. Frances began to go over her husband's business trips in her mind. And yes, there was indeed a business trip for 2 months, but it was so long ago. That's where we met. We started an affair. I had to move to your city. This relationship lasted for 5 years. And then I realized that he would never divorce anyway, so I left for the capital. At that time, I already had a daughter. I did not ask for his help. He always helped us himself. So he was helping someone, and his own family had to beg him for money? Frances shook her head. "Frances, I knew about you. I knew about you having 2 sons. Honestly, after this 5-year relationship, I never claimed him. Now that makes sense. Frances, forgive me. I live unhappily myself, thinking all the time that I ruined your family. We didn't have any family. We haven't been for a long time. It's just a shame that I didn't know my husband very well and didn't suspect that he had a mistress. And I didn't think he was transferring money to anyone. James was really a greedy man. You don't think I didn't have to listen for that money. If you want it, I'll give it all to you. I didn't spend any of that money. I have a wonderful husband now, who is raising my daughter like his own. No, it was the will of the deceased. May you have it, and may it bring you happiness. You know, I want to ask you one thing. How would you feel about your daughter associating with my sons? After all, they are related. Of course, positively. It's a pity we're miles apart, but maybe sometime in the future they will meet. I'll only be happy." Frances got up from the table and just walked away. She wasn't going to talk to Angela anymore. Everything she wanted, she found out. The woman went outside, looking around. At last, she was beginning to come alive. Frances returned home a completely different person. She no longer thought of her husband. She understood that now she could start a new life. Yes, it was a shame that her husband had cheated on her for so many years, that he had never told her that he had a daughter out of wedlock. Now, however, Frances still looked at the situation differently. Perhaps it was her fault that her husband had once cheated. Somewhere she had neglected him. Somewhere she had immersed herself in child-rearing. She had forgotten her husband altogether. After her conversation with her husband's mistress, Frances stopped going to the cemetery every week. She finally paid attention to the fact that she had aged a lot this year. The woman visited a beauty salon and updated her closet a bit. And after a few more months, she found herself a great job. Now she could do whatever she wanted. Soon Frances met an interesting man. They began to meet. Of course, she sometimes thought of James. She was very sorry for the way things had turned out. But on the other hand, if not for the whole situation, she never would have found out that James had cheated on her and that he had a second family. With a new man, Alex, she is at peace. They are happy. And she feels like a stone wall. Frances believes that their relationship is not a passing infatuation.